5 years ago, the most powerful woman in the city was nothing more than a servant. In a mansion that legally belonged to her, Elara scrubbed marble floors like a maid. Every morning started the same way: orders, insults, and laughter echoing through the cold halls of the house that was supposed to be her home. Her stepmother ruled the mansion like a queen. Her stepsisters mocked her like she didn't even exist, and her stepbrother, he enjoyed reminding her of one cruel truth: the house she cleaned every single day actually belonged to her. But after her father died, everything changed. The lawyers, the bank accounts, the family company, all of it was taken from her, and the rightful daughter of the house was turned into a servant. But their cruelty didn't stop there. One night, they burned the last thing her mother had ever given her, a simple blue dress, and when Elara cried, they laughed, as if destroying her memories meant nothing. But the worst moment came later. On a stormy night filled with thunder and rain, they threw her out of the mansion. No money, no family, no place to go. Standing alone outside the iron gates, soaked in the cold rain, they believed that was the end of Cinderella's story. They were wrong, because the girl they threw into the storm didn't disappear. She changed. 5 years later, the same girl who once cleaned their floors became one of the most powerful CEOs in the entire city. And tonight, she's coming back, not to beg, not to forgive, but to take back everything that was stolen from her. Because sometimes, Cinderella doesn't need a prince, she needs a plan, and this time, Cinderella is bringing revenge. So to understand how a servant became the woman who now controls everything, we have to go back to the beginning, back to the mansion on the hill, where Cinderella's story truly began. The glass walls of the executive office stretched from floor to ceiling, reflecting the glittering skyline of Seoul beneath the night sky. Inside the room, the air felt heavy, the kind of silence that only exists when power changes hands. At the center of it all stood Elara. Her black suit was perfectly tailored, sharp and elegant, the look of a woman who owned every inch of the empire behind her. The silver logo of the company gleamed across the wall like a crown. But the real scene wasn't behind her, it was in front of her. 3 people were kneeling on the marble floor: her stepmother, and the 2 stepsisters who once ruled her life like queens. Their expensive dresses were wrinkled, their perfect makeup ruined by tears. "Please, Elara," her stepmother whispered, her voice shaking. "You can't destroy us, we're family, family." The word echoed through the office like a cruel joke. Elara slowly stepped closer, the sound of her heels striking the marble floor echoing through the silent room. Years ago, these same women had forced her to scrub floors while they laughed over champagne. They called her useless. They told her she would always be nothing. And worst of all, they turned the rightful daughter of the house into a servant. Now they were begging. Elara folded her arms calmly and looked down at them. "Family," she repeated softly. Her voice was colder than the winter wind outside. "That's interesting, because the last time she checked, family doesn't force their daughter to sleep in the laundry room." The silence that followed felt endless. Outside the glass walls, the city lights glittered like distant stars. Inside the office, the empire that once belonged to her father now belonged to her. And the people who stole everything from her were about to lose everything. But to understand how the girl who washed dishes in her own mansion became the woman standing here today, you have to go back to the beginning, back to the mansion on the hill. The place where Cinderella was born, and the place where her revenge began. Morning in the mansion never began with sunlight, it began with orders. "Elara," the voice echoed down the marble staircase like a whip cracking through silence. Elara was already awake. She had been awake for hours. The kitchen floor was cold beneath her bare feet as she knelt beside a bucket of gray water, scrubbing the tiles until her fingers stung. The smell of cleaning chemicals mixed with the faint aroma of coffee drifting from the dining room upstairs. Once, long ago, she had eaten breakfast in that dining room. Now she cleaned it. "Elara." "Are you deaf?" her stepmother's voice shouted again. Elara wiped her wet hands against the thin apron tied around her waist and hurried upstairs. The dining room looked like something out of a luxury magazine. Crystal chandeliers, polished silverware, and a long oak table that could seat 20 guests. At the center of it sat her stepmother, elegantly dressed even this early in the morning. Across from her were the twins, her stepsisters, Erin and Sora, scrolling through their phones and laughing quietly. And beside them leaned against the wall with lazy arrogance, their older brother Daniel, the only son, and the cruelest of them all. "Well," Daniel said, raising an eyebrow. "Why does breakfast look like a disaster?" Elara glanced at the table. Everything was perfectly arranged, but Daniel smirked. "You call this orange juice fresh?" he scoffed. "It tastes like you squeezed it with your tears." Erin burst into laughter. "Honestly, Mother," she said, twirling her hair, "why do we even keep her here? She's useless." Elara lowered her gaze. She had learned long ago that silence was safer than arguing. Her stepmother took a slow sip of coffee before speaking. "Because servants are expensive," she said coldly. Her eyes drifted toward Elara like she was looking at a stain on the floor. "And we already have one." The table erupted in quiet laughter. Daniel leaned closer, his voice dropping to a mocking whisper. "You know what's funny, Cinderella?" he said. "That house technically belongs to you." The laughter grew louder. "But look at you," he continued, gesturing toward the mop bucket still clutched in her hand. "The great heiress cleaning toilets." Elara's chest tightened, but she said nothing. Because technically, Daniel was right. The mansion had belonged to her father, and after his death, the inheritance legally passed to her. But her stepmother had taken control of everything: lawyers, bank accounts, even the family business. All Elara had been left with was a small bedroom beside the laundry room, and a life of servitude. "Stop standing there like a statue," her stepmother snapped suddenly. "Clean the study next." Elara nodded quietly. "Yes, ma'am." She turned and walked down the long hallway toward the study. It had once been her father's favorite room. The air still smelled faintly of old books and cedarwood. Dust floated through the sunlight pouring from the tall windows. Elara began wiping the shelves slowly. Every object here carried memories: her father's leather chair, the antique clock he used to wind every Sunday. And on the corner of the desk a small velvet box. Her heart skipped. She opened it carefully. Inside was the last thing her mother had ever given her: a pale blue dress, soft, elegant, and simple. Her mother had sewn it herself years ago before she passed away. Elara touched the fabric gently. It was the only thing she had left of her. "I wondered where you were hiding." The voice behind her made her freeze. Daniel stood in the doorway, arms crossed. Erin and Sora peeked over his shoulders like curious spectators. Daniel walked into the room slowly. "Well, well," he said, lifting the dress from the box. "What's this?" Elara's voice trembled. "Please, don't touch that." Daniel's grin widened. "Oh," Erin laughed. "Is that the famous mommy dress she cries over?" Sora snatched the hem of the fabric. "It looks so cheap." "Give it back," Elara whispered, but Daniel wasn't listening. He glanced toward the fireplace, and without hesitation, he tossed the dress into the flames. For a moment, time stopped. Elara stared as the blue fabric caught fire instantly. "No," she rushed forward, reaching toward the flames, but Daniel grabbed her arm and pulled her back. "Careful," he said lazily. "You might burn yourself." The fire devoured the dress in seconds. The last piece of her mother turned into ash before her eyes. Tears blurred Elara's vision. Behind her, the siblings laughed. "Look at her crying," Sora said. "It's just a stupid dress." But Daniel wasn't finished. He pulled something from his pocket, a letter. Elara recognized it instantly, her scholarship acceptance letter. The one she had secretly applied for, the one that would have allowed her to leave this house. Daniel waved it slowly in front of her face. "You really thought you could escape," he said. He tore the letter in half, then again, and again. Tiny pieces of paper drifted to the floor like snow. Elara fell to her knees, trying to gather them. Her stepmother appeared in the doorway. Her expression was cold. "Enough," she said. Elara looked up hopefully, but the next words crushed her. "I'm tired of this useless girl." The storm outside had already begun. Wind rattled the tall windows. Her stepmother pointed toward the front door. "Get out," Elara blinked. "What?" "I said get out," she repeated calmly. "You're no longer welcome in this house." Daniel grabbed Elara by the arm and dragged her toward the entrance. The massive doors swung open. Rain poured down like a waterfall. Thunder cracked across the sky. Her small suitcase landed in the mud. "Good luck surviving, Cinderella," Daniel said with a smirk. Then the doors slammed shut. Elara stood alone in the storm. Cold rain soaked through her clothes instantly. The mansion loomed behind the iron gates like a dark castle. For the first time in years, she had nothing left to lose. Her mother's dress was gone. Her future had been destroyed. Her home had rejected her. Lightning flashed across the sky. Elara slowly lifted her face toward the rain, and through trembling lips, she whispered a promise. One day, her fists clenched tightly. "You'll all regret this." The storm roared louder, but Elara had already taken the first step into the night. And into the revenge that would one day bring them all to their knees. The storm followed Elara for miles. Rain pounded the empty road as she walked through the darkness with nothing but a small suitcase and the clothes clinging to her skin. The mansion lights behind her slowly disappeared into the distance, swallowed by fog and thunder. For the first time in her life, she was completely alone. Her hands trembled from the cold, but she kept walking, because going back was no longer an option. Hours later, the storm finally weakened, leaving the city soaked and silent. Elara found herself standing beneath the dim light of a bus station shelter, shivering as dawn slowly crept across the sky. Her reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar. Wet hair clung to her face. Her eyes were red from crying, but something else had appeared there too, a quiet, burning anger. She had lost everything, which meant she had nothing left to fear, and that was when fate stepped in. A black luxury car rolled quietly to a stop in front of the station. The door opened. An elderly man stepped out slowly, leaning on a polished cane. His suit was perfectly tailored despite the rain, and his sharp eyes studied Elara carefully. "You've been standing there for 2 hours," he said calmly. Elara looked at him, confused. "And yet you haven't asked anyone for help." His gaze sharpened. "Why?" Elara hesitated, because begging was something she had learned never to do. The old man smiled slightly. "Interesting," he stepped closer. "My name is Victor Han." The name meant nothing to Elara, but in the business world, Victor Han was a legend. A self-made billionaire who had built entire industries from nothing. He looked at the suitcase beside her feet. "Running away?" he asked. "No," Elara said quietly. Her voice was steadier than she expected. "I was thrown away." Victor studied her face, then he laughed softly. "Good," Elara blinked. "What? People who lose everything," he said, "are the most dangerous people in the world." He tapped his cane against the pavement. "Because they stop being afraid." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Victor made an offer. "Work for me." Elara stared at him. "I don't need a servant," he added. "I need someone who understands pain." "Why me?" she asked. Victor's eyes gleamed. "Because you didn't cry when I walked up to you." And just like that, her new life began. The next 5 years changed everything. Victor Han did not train Elara like an employee. He trained her like a weapon. Her mornings started before sunrise, reading financial reports and studying business strategies. Her afternoons were spent in boardrooms, silently observing negotiations between powerful executives. And her nights were filled with lessons. Victor taught her how power truly worked. "Money doesn't control the world," he told her one evening as they stood overlooking the city skyline. "Information does." He taught her how to read people's intentions through their tone of voice, how to recognize fear hidden behind confidence, how to turn silence into pressure. "You must never look desperate," Victor said during one negotiation practice. "Powerful people smell weakness like sharks smell blood." Slowly, Elara changed. The shy girl who once lowered her gaze disappeared. Her voice became calm, controlled, her posture straightened. Her eyes stopped showing fear. Victor even changed her appearance. "Your name carries history," he said one afternoon. "History can be dangerous." Elara watched as he slid a new identity file across the desk. A new passport, a new signature, a new name, Rose Han. CEO, the name felt strange at first, but soon it felt natural, because Rose was not the girl who cried in the rain. Rose was the woman who would one day own the storm. The moment everything changed came 2 years later. Victor invited Elara to sit beside him during a major investment meeting. A struggling tech startup was seeking funding. The founders looked nervous as they explained their product. Victor listened silently, but halfway through the presentation, Elara spoke. "Your business model will fail in 6 months." The room went quiet. Victor slowly turned toward her. "Explain!" Elara stood up and walked toward the screen. Her voice was calm, confident. She pointed to their financial projections. "You're targeting the wrong market," she said. She grabbed a marker and began rewriting their strategy. Within minutes, the entire business plan transformed. The founders stared at her like they were seeing a different person. Victor leaned back in his chair, smiling. 2 months later, the startup exploded in popularity. Their product became a global success, and the investment Victor made, based entirely on Elara's strategy, earned them millions. The business world began whispering a new name. Rose Han, the mysterious young CEO who could see opportunities others missed. Within 5 years, she became a millionaire. Then something more. Something far more dangerous. Because the girl who once scrubbed floors in silence now controlled companies worth hundreds of millions, but money was never her true goal. Her true goal was waiting on a hill outside the city, behind iron gates, inside a mansion where 3 people still believed Cinderella had disappeared forever. They had no idea she was coming back. And this time, she wouldn't be knocking on the door. She would be buying the entire house. 5 years had passed since the night Elara was thrown into the storm. 5 years since the iron gates of the mansion slammed shut behind her. Now, she was back. But the girl who once stood trembling in the rain no longer existed. The black sedan rolled smoothly through the city streets, its tinted windows reflecting the skyline that had once felt so distant from her life. Inside the car sat Rose Han. Her posture was straight, her expression calm, her dark suit elegant and powerful. A diamond watch rested lightly on her wrist, catching the light every time the city passed by the window. Across from her sat Victor Han. The old billionaire studied her quietly. "You're sure you want to do this today?" he asked. Rose didn't look away from the window. "I've waited 5 years," Victor nodded slowly. "Revenge is a dangerous business decision." Rose's lips curved slightly. "So is underestimating someone." The car stopped in front of a familiar building, the company headquarters her father had once built, but the glass walls looked older now, tired, neglected. Because the truth was simple. Without her father's leadership, the company had begun to collapse. Bad investments, poor management, and a family who believed wealth would last forever. They were drowning, and today they were about to meet their savior. Inside the conference room, the atmosphere was tense. Elara's stepmother sat at the head of the table, nervously adjusting her expensive jacket. Aaron and Sora whispered anxiously beside her. Across from them sat Daniel. But the arrogant confidence he once carried was gone. The company's financial reports spread across the table told a painful story. Debt, losses, failure. "We don't have many options left," Daniel muttered. Just then, the conference room doors opened. Everyone looked up. The woman who entered commanded the entire room instantly. Her heels clicked softly against the polished floor. Her black suit was flawless. Her posture radiated absolute control. Rose Han. Behind her walked 2 assistants carrying documents. And Victor Han himself. The family immediately stood. "Mr. Han," the stepmother said nervously, forcing a smile. Victor gestured toward Rose. "I'm not the investor today." He paused. "She is." All eyes turned toward Rose. She sat calmly across from them, placing a folder on the table. "My company is interested in acquiring controlling shares," she said smoothly. Her voice was confident, elegant, not a trace of the girl they once knew. The stepmother leaned forward eagerly. "You would save our company." Rose tilted her head slightly. That depends. Daniel cleared his throat. What are your terms? Rose opened the folder slowly. Inside were contracts, detailed, legal, dangerous. If my firm takes responsibility for your debts, Rose said, we gain majority ownership of the company. The family exchanged nervous glances. But that's not all, Rose continued. As collateral, she slid another document across the table. The mansion will be included in the agreement. Silence filled the room. Sora whispered, the house. Rose's expression didn't change. It's simply insurance. Daniel studied the numbers. Their situation was desperate. If they didn't sign this deal, the company would collapse within months. And the mansion would be seized by banks anyway. Finally, he nodded. Fine. The stepmother hesitated, but greed and desperation had always guided her decisions. Prepare the papers, she said. Rose slid the contracts forward. Already done. One by one, they signed. The sound of each pen stroke echoed like a final verdict. And when the last signature was finished, Rose calmly closed the folder. The assistants gathered the documents. Victor's hand smiled faintly. It's done. Daniel leaned back in relief. So the company is saved. Rose slowly stood up. Her heels echoed across the floor as she walked toward the window. Outside, the city stretched endlessly. Then she spoke. Yes, she turned slowly. The company is saved. Her hand lifted toward her face, and she wiped away the soft makeup beneath her eyes. The motion was simple, but the room froze. Because without the makeup, her face looked different, familiar. Her gaze locked onto Daniel, and she said a sentence none of them would ever forget. Careful, she said softly. You might burn yourself. The same words Daniel had spoken 5 years ago when he threw her mother's dress into the fire. The color drained from his face instantly. No, he whispered. Aaron's hands began to shake. Sora stared like she had seen a ghost. The stepmother slowly stood up, her lips trembled. Elara, the room felt like it had lost all air. Rose smiled calmly. But this time, it wasn't the smile of a polite investor. It was the smile of someone who had just closed a trap. Yes, she said quietly, it's me. Her eyes moved across their terrified faces. And according to the contracts you just signed, she lifted the folder slightly. I now own the company, she paused, and the mansion. Silence exploded across the room. 5 years ago, they threw Cinderella into the storm. Today, they had just handed her the entire kingdom. The news spread through the mansion like a shockwave. Within hours, the legal documents were finalized. Ownership had officially transferred. The company, the mansion, everything the family believed they controlled was now under the authority of Rose Han. Or rather, Elara, the same girl they once forced to sleep beside the laundry room. That afternoon, black security vehicles rolled through the iron gates of the mansion. Uniformed guards stepped out. The stepmother stood in the grand hallway, shaking with rage. You can't do this, she shouted as the guards approached. This is my house. Elara walked slowly down the staircase, her heels echoing through the marble halls that once felt like a prison. Now they belonged to her again. No, Elara said calmly, her voice carried across the entire hall. This was always my house. Daniel stepped forward angrily. You tricked us, Elara tilted her head slightly. Did I? She glanced toward the documents in the guard's hands. You read the contracts, you signed them. The stepmother's voice cracked. We had no choice. Elara's eyes were cold. Neither did I. The guards moved forward. Within minutes, suitcases were thrown onto the driveway. The same driveway where Elara had once stood in the rain. Now the roles had reversed. The stepmother screamed as the gates opened. Daniel tried to argue. The stepsisters cried and begged. But the guards didn't stop. One by one, they were dragged outside the mansion they once ruled, and the gates closed behind them. Months passed. The world moved on. Without the company's wealth, the family's life collapsed quickly. The mansion was gone. The luxury cars were repossessed. The designer clothes disappeared. Daniel found work loading boxes in a warehouse. Aaron and Sora struggled with low-paying retail jobs. And the stepmother, she spent her days serving customers at a small cafe on the edge of the city. For the first time in their lives, they understood what it meant to be powerless. Karma had completed its circle. One quiet morning, Elara stood in front of a small grave beneath a tall cherry blossom tree. The stone was simple. Her father's name was carved gently into the marble. The wind carried pink petals across the grass. Elara placed a bouquet of white flowers beside the grave. For a moment, she simply stood there. The girl who once cried in silence was gone. In her place stood a woman who had rebuilt her life from nothing. "I got the house back," she whispered softly. "And the company." The wind moved gently through the trees. Elara smiled faintly. "You always told me something, Dad." Her voice was calm. "Fairy tales aren't about magic." She looked toward the rising sun beyond the cemetery gates. "They're about courage." She turned and walked away from the grave, because Cinderella's story had never really been about a prince. It had been about survival, about patience, about strategy. Because the truth was simple, Cinderella didn't need a prince, she needed a plan. And if you enjoyed this story of revenge, betrayal, and justice, make sure to subscribe to Elara Revenge Stories for more powerful stories where karma always finds its way back.